U.S. President Donald Trump has told Hamas to sign his peace plan for Gaza or they will, quote, pay in hell. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a number of Arab and Western nations have already backed the proposal. It includes the return of Israeli hostages and the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. It also stipulates that Hamas militants must lay down their weapons.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived at the White House Monday to discuss President Trump's plan for peace in Gaza. Trump, eager to broker a peace deal, and Netanyahu under growing international pressure.
Thank you very much. We had a long, strong talk, Bibi and I, and he understands it's time. It's time. History has shown.
I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims. It will bring back to Israel all our hostages, dismantle Hamas's military capabilities, end its political rule, and ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel.
But the plan could prove a hard sell to Netanyahu's coalition partners, many of whom are opposed to a peace deal and have called for the permanent displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, a prospect Trump's proposal rule out, at least in writing. Other key points include an immediate end to the war and a gradual Israeli withdrawal, a return of all remaining hostages within days, and demilitarization of Gaza, a temporary international stabilizing force to ensure security, redevelopment of Gaza under international oversight, an unhindered flow of humanitarian aid and economic development.
Israel would have my fallback to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas. But I hope that we're going to have a deal for peace. And if Hamas rejects the deal, which is always possible, they're the only one left. Everyone else has accepted it. But I have a feeling that we're going to have a positive answer.
The fate of Gaza has stirred emotions around the world, including in the U.S. Capitol.
This little boy is a Palestinian boy, and he
Trump, seal the deal.
He's starving.
Trump,
he's an Israeli hostage, and he's starving. And we are here to make sure they can live a full life and be nourished, held, and loved.
I don't think there's going to be an easy deal. I don't think there's an easy fix. But I don't think Bibi's trying. And I need to see him trying to end this war and not just catering to the right-wing extremists in his coalition.
Netanyahu has faced growing international criticism over Israel's conduct of its war in Gaza, including allegations of war crimes. And at home too, there's growing public pressure to end the war and secure the release of the remaining hostages.
Well, I'm joined now by our correspondent, Emily Gordine. She's in Jerusalem. Good evening to you, Emily. You know, a few hours after agreeing to the U.S. peace plan in Washington, the Israeli Prime Minister put out a video in Hebrew that seemed to counter some of the core points of the proposal, including the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, as well as the eventual creation of a Palestinian state. Do we know why he did that?
Well, I mean, Brent, this 20-point plan, those points are very broad, and negotiators will have to breathe some life into them. They're subject to interpretation. And for Benjamin Netanyahu, he knows that he cannot risk a public confrontation with Donald Trump. The US is Israel's most important ally. And at the same time, Netanyahu also knows he depends on his government's partners who are opposed to a ceasefire deal, who have threatened in the past that if the government were to sign a ceasefire deal, they would leave the government, which would essentially mean the collapse of this government and new elections. So Benjamin Netanyahu has to walk a very fine line here.
Yeah, you touched on this. Tell us more about the government reaction to this proposal.
Well, the reactions have been mixed. Of course, members of Netanyahu's Likud party have largely sided with him. But Netanyahu is in a coalition government with two far-right parties who are deeply opposed to a deal. Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir, the two leaders of those two parties, have threatened in the past to leave the government if the government were to sign any ceasefire deal. Now, the two of them were very vocal when it came to the Prime Minister's apology to Qatar over the recent strikes, calling these strikes essentially the most immoral thing and criticising Netanyahu for apologising. But on this deal itself, they have been fairly quiet so far. Bezalel Smotrich said at one point that he hopes that Hamas will reject the deal because he believes it's a bad deal. He put out conditions prior to this meeting between Netanyahu and Trump under which he could see his party agree to a ceasefire deal, but none of these conditions are met under the current proposal. But you have to keep in mind the high holidays. We're in the middle of the high holidays here in Israel. Essentially, Yom Kippur starts tomorrow evening, and it's unclear how soon we will get a reaction from the government's different coalition partners, but we're also still crucially waiting for a response from Hamas.
I know that we have seen large protests across Israel for months now calling for an end to the fighting. How are people reacting to this 21 or 20-point peace plan where you are?
Well, the vast majority of Israelis want the hostages to return. The families and friends and those who support the hostages, they want to see an end to the deal. They want to see an end to the war, and they want to see a deal that will see the return of the hostages. But again, Israel is a country that is also quite split. People on the right and on the far right don't want a deal, and they want to see Israel take control of Gaza. So split reactions when it comes to ordinary Israelis. And on the Palestinian side, certainly many have told me they want this war to end. They want the suffering of the Palestinians to end in Gaza. But they also feel like this was a deal where Palestinians were once again on the table, but not at the table.
Emily Gordine with the latest for us from Israel. Emily, as always, thank you.
Let's bring in Shalon Lipner. He works for the Middle East program of the think tank Atlantic Council and joins me from Jerusalem. Shalon, do you think it's possible that the breakthrough we all have been waiting for could come from a plan designed by President Trump?
Good to be with you, Gerhard. I mean, this is a hopeful moment in the region. After almost 2 years of fighting right now, people sort of see sunshine, a little ray coming through the clouds right now. I think that the broad buy-in from the U.S., from Israel, from many Muslim and Arab countries around the world, from Europe, from lots of different quarters that we're seeing, is an encouraging component of this. But as you say, as we all indicate, the big question mark right now is whether or not Hamas signs on to this. And of course, that's only the beginning of a process as well. We still have details of an agreement to iron out. We still have implementation to look after, and there are going to be numerous spoilers out there who have interests in this not succeeding. So much of the heavy lifting is still ahead of us.
That's true. And Qatar says a meeting on this plan will be held with Hamas and Turkey later today. What do you expect from that meeting?
Well, I mean, Hamas is looking to formulate an answer right now. I mean, originally they said they hadn't received the details of the plan. Now, apparently, there's an acknowledgement, I guess, that they have, and they will, be responding in kind, I assume, in the coming days or weeks. Obviously, they want to be able to sort of coordinate with their sponsors right now. Turkey's been a big friend to Hamas. It's a big player in the region. Obviously, as President Trump said yesterday, he has immense respect for Erdogan and for Turkey as well. So, they have a big role here. And I think that, they want to line up these ducks and get it right. I mean, one question that will be interesting moving forward will be, just as we've seen this, apology between Netanyahu and the Qataris yesterday. I mean, what will be the future state of Israel's relations with Turkey, which have, been rocky in recent years? Will we see sort of a rapprochement there as well, which will allow the Turks a bigger role in this? And those are questions we're going to be looking for answers to.
Now, this plan includes a gradual Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And today, Netanyahu has emphasized that the Israeli military would stay in most of Gaza. How does that go together?
Well, I mean, Hamas is looking to formulate an answer right now. I mean, they originally they said they hadn't received the details of the plan. Now, apparently, there's an acknowledgement, I guess, that they have, and Well, I don't know if he'll actually be most of Gaza. Clearly, for his own reasons, political and otherwise, and he's emphasizing the parts of the deal which are amenable to him and to an Israeli audience. As far as that's concerned, they've made Israeli spokesmen have made much of saying that to the extent that we have this, we have demilitarization in Gaza, then we would be looking at some sort of commensurate redeployment of the IDF, very much making one contingent upon the other. But throughout this, Netanyahu has been emphasizing the advantages of the agreement, right? And in terms of how it responds to all the stated war aims of the Israeli cabinet in terms of ending the war, the return of the hostages, which are expected to be upfront in the deal if it happens this way within the first 72 hours. So, clearly a lot of what we're hearing right now is messaging and signaling, but there is that piece about to what extent Israel would realign along the perimeter. I think there was also a report today suggesting that maybe the changes were introduced into the actual deal that Hamas is now looking at since the meeting that Trump held with the Arab leadership after Netanyahu intervened, and there may be changes there that have affected that as well. So maybe we may be looking at some sort of perimeter presence. I don't think it's fully deployed in Gaza. If this deal goes through, I don't think that's what we're looking at all.
Now, one point of this plan also points to an implementation of a board of peace that would be headed by Trump and the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair to oversee Gaza's administration and reconstruction. Where else in this plan do we see Trump's fingerprints?
Well, I think we see them all over the place. Clearly what has brought this to a head right now is that Trump is now apparently more determined than ever to make this happen. He said since the beginning he wants wars to end. He has, very much an agenda to expand the scope of normalization in the region. I think now he's very much at the table. One interesting related question, of course, if you're talking about the board, is, as Trump said yesterday, he's a very busy man with lots on his plate. So one overarching question moving forward on this will be, to what extent does he remain engaged in this process, or does he outsource it to other parties? Does he remain involved? There's always the risk, given the history that we've seen over the past couple of years, that if he were to take a step back from the table and sort of subcontract this to other people, maybe the parties would also become less committed to the actual deal. So we definitely see his fingerprints on the draft, but I think that for this to succeed, we're going to have to see his fingerprints on the implementation stage as well, or could falter.
Shalon Lipner there from the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Pleasure to be with you.
For more on that, let's bring in journalist Karim El-Gawhari in Cairo. Karim, Hamas negotiators are reviewing the U.S. peace plan there that Israel has already agreed to. What will they be considering when looking at this ultimatum?
Well, difficult to see what they're going to do, but some points, of course, are positive for them. That's the permanent end of the war in this deal, something they always demanded. Is also in it is the withdrawal of the Israeli army, although it's gradually. Of course, the most difficult thing for them to swallow, basically, is the disarming and that they're losing power in Gaza in case they agree to this deal. Of course, we have a threat, as you could have heard, by Trump saying, like, if Hamas doesn't sign it, he will give green light to Netanyahu to do whatever he wants to do in the Gaza Strip, and that might even include the displacement of the Palestinians. Now, for the Hamas, what they're probably considering is now what this internationalization of the security in the Gaza Strip and of the administration of the Gaza Strip really means. Can they market this as something that protects the Palestinian people from the occupation, or will they see it as a continuation of the occupation under a different pretext? So that's basically what they're going to consider. But in any case, what does this arming Hamas mean? It's an asymmetrical warfare. They have light weapons, easy to hide, so that's not difficult. And Hamas, of course, also knows as long the occupation continues, there will be some kind of militant resistance against it, if then it will have the name of Hamas or of any other new organization.
Now, a number of Arab and Muslim, or mostly Muslim countries, including Turkey, Jordan, Egypt and the UAE, have endorsed the plan. How much weight will that have during Hamas deliberations?
I think that's the most important thing for them, because that's somehow the Arab and Islam guarantee for them. And it's also interesting, they did a common declaration in the last hours where they emphasized very important points, what's important for them. And the important thing for them is that no Palestinians are displaced from the Gaza Strip, as it's written in the deal, that there will be a full withdrawal of the Israeli army. And I think for them, most important, as mentioned in point 19 of this agreement, this whole thing will end up in a Palestinian state. So that's what they are emphasizing. That's how they are reading this deal.
Now, there is, in this draft, there is no role for the Palestinian Authority. It calls for an international transitional authority to govern Gaza with support from a UN-endorsed multinational force. What does that mean for the Palestinian side?
Well, it means they have to see what this internationalization exactly means. Now, that it is basically, the overview is done by Trump himself, and the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair is not a good sign for them. Tony Blair is seen by them as basically a war criminal who started the war in Iraq under the false pretext of Iraqi mass destruction of weapons of mass destruction. So it's not a good business card in the Arab world. So there's going to be some big mistrust, but they're going to see how this is going to turn out, because we also have internationally, of course, the balance of power somehow shifted. The world looks differently on Gaza. The whole thing, I think, will get its own dynamic once it really will start.
Mm-hmm. And briefly on the other side, Israel may be reluctant to hand over security, will it not be?
Well, when we heard what Netanyahu said after he signed the deal, and not during the press conference, but afterwards, basically to his own people in Hebrew, he was very clear. He said there will be no Palestinian state. I'm against the Palestinian state. And he said, I also have no intention to withdraw the Israeli army from the Gaza Strip. That, he said, literally will not happen. Now, all these words basically contradict the words and the spirit of this agreement. So what this internationalization at the end will mean, if they manage to pressure both sides into this agreement or not, that will be, I think, the decisive thing.
The journalist Karim El-Gawhari in Cairo there. Thank you very much, Karim.
You're welcome.
And for more on this, I'm joined now by H.A. Hellyer. He's an expert on Middle East affairs and international security, and he joins me now from London. Mr. Hellyer, it's good to have you with us. You know, just a few hours after agreeing to the plan in Washington, the Israeli Prime Minister put out a video in Hebrew that seemed to counter some of the core points of this peace plan, including the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza and the eventual creation of a Palestinian state. Was this just to ease fears at home, do you think, or how do you read this video?
No, I think it's a very important video for people to pay close attention to. When you consider the history of the past 2 years, at multiple points, Netanyahu has sabotaged negotiations and other peace plans and other plans that were meant to lead to a ceasefire. This has been widely reported in the Israeli press multiple times, so it's no surprise that he's trying to maneuver on this occasion as well. Also keep in mind, the 21-point plan that was put in front of these different Arab and Muslim nations last week is significantly different than the one that was announced yesterday. And in the Israeli press, this has already been explored. Netanyahu managed to negotiate with the White House to get certain things changed, particularly when it came to the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, anything to do with the Palestinian state, the decommissioning or disarmament of Hamas, quite significant things. And they didn't go back to the Arab Muslim states that had put their names and credibility on the line by endorsing. They simply had Netanyahu come to the White House yesterday, discuss with the president, and then the new 21-point plan was announced.
So, Mr. Hellyer, do we know what is the truth here, particularly with Israel leaving Gaza and the creation of a Palestinian state? I mean, are those part of this plan or not?
When it comes to a Palestinian state, I don't think anybody's lying here. I think that Netanyahu has made it abundantly clear he will not see a Palestinian state established in the Palestinian territories. He's made that abundantly clear. It was very interesting to see how the Arab states, when they gave a message of support after the press conference, in the message of support, it mentioned a Palestinian state. The joint statement talked about a Palestinian state. It also talked about full Israeli withdrawal. When it comes to full Israeli withdrawal, the plan itself now, frankly, allows effectively for Israeli troops to remain in Gaza pretty much indefinitely, because the Israelis have now managed to tie their moving of Israeli troops out of parts of Gaza to timetables and milestones that they, of course, will be intimately involved in assessing. And then even if all of the milestones are met, there still has to be this final sort of, handover to the Palestinian Authority, an authority that the Israelis have made very clear that they have no intention of allowing to do anything in Gaza. And of course, this perimeter of Gazan territory, which is about 10% of the territory, mind you, and it's on Gazan territory. It's not as though the Israelis are saying, we will create a perimeter on our own territory to ensure security. No, we're going to take more territory away from Gaza in order to do that. Well, it's not that they're lying. They're actually very blatant and transparent about this. And they have been, quite frankly, for the past 2 years. It's simply governments refuse to take actions to actually hold them accountable, including yours, by the way, and mine.
Well, what about Hamas negotiators? They're reviewing this proposal now. I mean, what will they be considering when they look at this ultimatum that has been given to them?
I think they'll be considering if they're able to withstand not simply the pressure from Washington, not simply the pressure from these Arab states and Muslim states, including Qatar and Turkey. I think they'll also be considering if they'll be able to withstand the pressure from Palestinians who are in Gaza, many of whom see Hamas in an incredibly negative light. And when it comes to this particular proposal, one can argue the proposal is bad. Okay, people can argue about it being good or bad. But I don't think Palestinians writ large in Gaza are looking for a perfect, near perfect, or even good plan. I think they're looking for a plan that ends this nightmare of devastation that's been wrought upon them on a campaign that so many in the international community have condemned as genocide by the Israelis on the people of Gaza. They'll be willing to go to any plan, I think, at this point. Okay. And nobody could blame them.
Okay. H.A. Hellyer, Mr. Hellyer, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
German politicians are preparing for a special two-day cabinet meeting aimed at defining the government's priorities. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is among those attending the meeting being held near Berlin. Competitiveness of the German economy and digitisation of the country are set to be high on the agenda. Before heading into the talks, Merz voiced his support for a US-led peace plan in Gaza.
We support the peace plan for Gaza proposed by US President Trump. This plan is, after almost 2 years of bloodshed, the best chance for ending the war. The fact that Israel supports this plan is a significant step forward. Now Hamas needs to approve it and free up the path to peace. If there is an agreement, Germany is ready to participate in the implementation of this deal in a political and humanitarian way, and of course in an effort to rebuild the region. We see that as work towards a Middle East where Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and safety next to each other in 2 states.
For more, I'm joined by DW Chief Political Editor Michaela Küffner, who's following that cabinet meeting for us. Michaela, what more do we know about Germany's support for this new Gaza peace plan?
Well, as we just heard from the German Chancellor, he's fully behind that American initiative. That's at the same time, of course, is a recognition that if anyone can sway Benjamin Netanyahu in his offensive in Gaza, it is the US president. Germany simply is not a big political player here. At the same time, Germany is working hard to be perceived as being constructive. Germany did not join the countries recognizing a Palestinian state led by France and Saudi Arabia at the UN General Assembly last week. But what Germany is pledging is more financial support for the Palestinian Authority, which is on the brink of collapse after Israel continues to withhold tax payments that could keep that one structure, that one governmental structure that Palestinians have. And that is the only one that could potentially play a constructive role in the post-Hamas phase, the post-war phase in Gaza, simply keeping that afloat. That's where Germany sees its constructive role. It's not a big player in making these decisions. This is very much a bilateral thing, pretty much between the two men, the US president and Benjamin Netanyahu. And now the big question, of course, whether Hamas will take it or whether it will leave this and once again try and push back the Israelis in a military struggle that it simply does not appear to be able to fight in any way.
And Michaela, what else is high priority on the agenda for this meeting of German cabinet ministers?
Well, the bigger line is that Germany simply needs economic growth. That is the message that we've heard from Friedrich Merz. That is something the German Chancellor also campaigned on to get elected. He wants to strengthen the German economy, but that is still slumping. We've just seen unemployment rates dip below the 3 million once again, but that's too little to be able to be sold as a success. The growth simply isn't there. And other European countries like Spain, for instance, are above 2%. That's where Germany wants to get as well. And to lay the foundation for that, his government also pledged to tackle the bigger overarching issues like digitization, but also the whole question of bureaucracy. It's a federal state. Different states make different rules on key issues like taxation, for instance, and also certain norms. And that's something in Villa Borsig behind me, that building, that's something the coalition wants to hammer out. Having announced that there will be an autumn of reform, that's already expected to be very little indeed. They need something to show for what they proclaimed would be a real change in how the German government works and that can deliver economic growth that Friedrich Merz simply promised.
DW Chief Political Editor Michaela Küffner, thank you.